in India that did leave me in the hospital for 99 hours with dengue fever. So it wasn't all sun and roses. I'm sure some of you from the South are familiar with dengue fever. Basically, your body temperature goes up to a ridiculous number, mine went up to 106.8 degrees. I spent 5 days getting covered in ice packs, just kind of laying there going, it is so hot. It is so hot. But I was able to recover from that. And when all was said and done, I ended up taking 8,000 pictures, filming 60 hours of video, and interviewing more than 200 of these teams. Talking to them one-on-one about what I had done as a youth venture and what they were doing in their communities to create that change. And what I found was that this is really the first truly global generation. Borders do not confine us any longer. We're listening to the same types of music, eating the same types of foods, watching the same things on television, but we're also caring about the same major issues facing us. You know, whether it's global warming or HIV/AIDS, these young people understood that the impact of that problem went beyond their own border and had a ripple effect really to people all across the planet. Just two examples. A team I met in Mexico City called Ishel. A 22 and 24-year-old who are biology students and developed their own fertilizer that's organic and is cheaper than genetically mutated fertilizer. And they're using that technology to build organic rooftop farms in the poorest communities of Mexico City. So not only are they bringing this organic produce, healthy food to poor communities, but they're teaching them essentially how to build their own livelihood. I mean, organic produce is now a completely new market. Also, in the scope of this sort of global impact, I met with a girl in Seattle. Her name is Jessica. She started an organization called Richards Rwanda. And they raise money for young girls in Rwanda who can't afford to go to school. Because it only costs $35 US dollars to send a girl to school for an entire year in Rwanda. She's raised $7,000 in 3 months, and her next goal is to build her own school. She's 12 years old. And I think she's a great testament to what this is and what these young people are. The other realization was that while it's not a majority of young people yet, it's still an incredibly powerful minority. And I think it's important to remember how incredibly powerful minorities can be. Social movements, for as long as we can go back, have been driven by minority groups of people. Less than 50% doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have the ability to create change. I think a great example of this, I mean, for me as a young person, I look back at the 60s and 70s and I think that everyone was a hippie. Everyone was a hippie, they launched this amazing movement that changed society. Only 10% of people in the 60s and 70s actually were hippies. And yet you look back at that time and you would think that they essentially defined an entire generation. And not just a generation, but a course of history. And so, if we just shoot at 10%, and believe me, this is going to far exceed 10%, we're looking at something that is astronomically larger with an incredible impact. Just Youth Venture alone has 2,200 teams in 14 countries that involve 25,000 young people directly and impact 500,000. And that's one of many organizations doing this. Young American Business Trust, their network, and so forth. So you're literally already talking about millions and millions of young people doing this. So while there are these amazing stories and these amazing realizations, there are also huge challenges. I just need some water. Fighting a cold. Leaving you on the edge, what are the huge challenges? I mean, first and foremost, it's really easy to feel like you're alone in this, right? I mean, here I am graduating, leaving this college and thinking, oh, what happened? Where are all these people that I thought cared about so much? Where are the stories about this? And I think the reality is that good news, in a lot of ways, is no news. We had a very difficult time trying to get people to cover this story. I'd say, there's millions of young people all around the world creating social change, part of this global movement. Now, to me, that sounds like an incredible story. And more times, at least dozens of times, you heard, well, this isn't something we cover. And yet, I mean, I think most of us in this room could probably talk about the intricate details of Britney Spears' life. That is somehow news, and this somehow isn't. So when you look at that, and she's a young person, you're thinking, if you're reading the paper, this is what this generation is. If this is what I'm reading, this must be who they are. Just one example, when I was in South Africa, there was a teacher strike that had lasted for 5 weeks. And the day the strike ended, a 5-week strike, the lead story in the newspaper in Johannesburg was that Paris Hilton went to jail. And I was blown away. I mean, she's not even from South Africa. She's in the United States. She went to jail. She hadn't really done anything to help anyone ever. And yet, here's this teacher strike ending that was led by a movement of young people, and yet that story wasn't being told. And by missing this, we as a society are missing out on what the future will be. I mean, we're talking about the leaders of tomorrow, and you may think, well, that's only in the social sector, this new crazy third sector of people taking their own action. Not true. What about the business sector? These are the future business leaders, the people who are going to be running these organizations, and are already the consumers, and will be the consumers of tomorrow. 73% of American young people say that the actions of a business impact their buying decisions. 73%. Now that is a majority, and that's one sector. The government sector, these are the political leaders of tomorrow. These are the people who are going to be writing policies and leading governments. At the same time, they're the voters of today and tomorrow. And again, they're paving this way for this new social sector, this third sector. And if that's not pertinent, if that's not news, then I have no idea what is. Everywhere I went, I asked young people the same question: why are you doing this? And they all looked at me with this look of like, what kind of question is that? I mean, if I don't do it, who's gonna do it? I mean, it has to get done. It was such a simple answer to them. It wasn't some complex, drawn-out thing. If someone else isn't gonna do it, then I need to take care. I mean, it's a problem, it has to be solved. And that brought me back to a question I was constantly asked by my parents' friends who were older. What's your generation's cause? What are you gonna do? You know, we were the sexual revolution, we were hippies, we were Vietnam, we were World War II, our grandparents were World War II. What's your cause? And that answer from those young people really gave me my response to them. We don't really have the luxury to pick our own cause. We have dozens of major problems right in front of us that need solutions. Global warming, HIV/AIDS, if we don't find an answer, we're looking at the possibility of not having a planet to live on. So it's less of really a want to do something, and it's more of a have to do something. If we don't, who will? In a lot of ways, too, it's reshaping the concept of changing the world. Now, imagine a huge map of the world, and then on that map you put one red dot here in Washington, D.C., for one young person doing something that's socially responsible or taking action to fix a problem. Now, when you look at that map of the world, that one red dot looks really, really lonely. I mean, how could they possibly be changing the world? What impact could they possibly be having? But start to add another dot and another dot for every young person who's taking action, fixing local needs with local solutions to solve problems that no one else is answering. And all of a sudden what you see is an entire map of the world covered in red dots. Now this is the traditional way of how we think about changing the world. Usually it's one major leader, whether it's a Martin Luther King or a John F. Kennedy, leading a movement, or a Gandhi, leading a movement and reshaping the way society works, or a large organization going in excuse me, and saying, this is how it should be, this is the solution to your problem. That's not the answer anymore. The answer now is to ask, what is the most crucial problem? And believe me, young people are full of answers, and full of reason to want to do something. And so when you look at changing the world in that concept, you're looking at the future of changing the world. It's going to be the collective of those red dots. And what we have to focus on is connecting them, bringing them together, bridging those young people so that they can be more enabled to create the change they want to. Now each photo here individually tells the story of one of those red dots. But the collective, the exhibition as a whole, tells the story of an entire generation that's catalyzing a global movement of social change that is reshaping our world. So I invite you to look, to learn, and to begin to see this not as the exception, as it's been seen for so long. You know, young person plants tree on Earth Day, saves planet. But as the rule, and the new reality. This generation is replacing signs and protests with individual action, and this will be our civil rights movement. I have no doubt. It's news, and I intend to continue to be a voice and raise the issue and fight for my generation's place in this new global society, because I certainly think we've earned it. So thank you very much. We're going to put another round of photographs up.